Today I'm going to show you how I create worlds of atmosphere with ambient melodies, textures, and layers, with lots of techniques, most of which are very simple but really powerful at elevating the emotion in your tracks. To show you how I've put together a beat idea and it sounds a little like this. I love luscious ambient sounds like that. If you're new here, my name is Kobe McCool. It's great to have you here. And if you're a returning subscriber, you're the best. So let's dive into this atmospheric world. Fundamentally, what I'm using to create all of these sounds are a combination of reverb and/or textures. And within FL Studio, there's so many different ways to do this. There's no right or wrong. There's just an extensive toolkit of techniques that you can use, and I'm just going to show you some of my favorite ones just now. To give us a foundation, I put together a really simple kick and snare pattern. The key thing here though being that the sound selection and sound design of the drums is really important. The pattern being so simple means that there's lots of space to really hear the character of the drum sounds. There's fundamentally a click sound there, but there's also lots of other noise to go along with it to add character to it. I've then taken some nice Foley samples and spiced them up a bit so that they sound even more luscious and tingly in your ears. So without the effects on them, that's what they sound like. There's a clock tick in there, there's some ice breaking, and there's some other jangly, shaky Foley sounds. I have then just sent those to an effects channel, and within the effects here, I've started off with a delay. That's quite cool, but it can be a little bit overpowering because there's almost too much going on. But to smoothen out those transients that are coming through from it repeating so many times, I've added a reverb bit. So you still hear a bit of that transient hit. I've then added Valhalla Supermassive. This is such a powerhouse of a plugin for all of these types of effects, and it's free. So if you haven't got it yet, check it down below. And you can hear in the high end of that Foley sound, it's almost like it's electrifying those sounds, and I love it. It's so cool. I don't really understand how Supermassive works. I just know that it makes really cool sounds. And then, of course, just an EQ to tame some of those frequencies, remove the low end so that it's not too washy. When I was piecing that together, I would usually put the kick and snare and basic pattern down first, then add the other Foley sounds once I've got my other instruments, so that I can fill the space appropriately. And there's the drums. The next sound, and probably the most important one in all of this track, is this really luscious piano that I got recently. One of my producer friends recommended this to me, and it has to be one of the best value for money plugins that I've ever bought. It's only $20 or however much that is in pounds, and it's called this Imagiro piano. Let's see if I can find it here. I presume it's just a real recorded piano, and you've got a couple of parameters that you can shift, but it sounds so delightful. You can change the hammer volume so that it sounds... Obviously, when it's right up that high, it's probably a little bit too overpowering. It just really adds so much character to each note and gives it that human touch. You can also change the tone. Just a little bit more bright and energetic, but I decided to go for a more mellow tone for this particular track. I used the FA08 that I have over there to play around with a couple of relatively simple chords, but added in lots of little inflections and melody lines on the top to make it sound really pretty. Because although the chords themselves are very simple, the character from that rich piano sound along with the expression of actually playing it makes all the difference. I played in a rough idea and you can see the difference in the note velocities. It would take me a long time to make each and every one of those individual. That's why it's so helpful if you do know how to play the piano anyway, but you can go in and change them, and that contributes to the expression so much. So let's dive into how you might go about making some different atmospheres and ambiences. Obviously, the most immediate method is just adding some reverb and delay blended together. So I have this piano sound which is coming here. All I have done is sidechained that information to a piano effect bus here, and then used a fruity send within the piano channel and sent that information to the piano effects here. You don't have to do this, you could just put them directly onto the piano, but doing this allows you to separate those two signals, the dry from the wet. So now within the piano effects, I can put on a reverb, and if I pull the dry signal down completely, then I can turn this piano sound off if I wanted, but I'm still getting the reverb and the effects coming through. You can just record that sound out if you wanted to into an Edison. Now you can do whatever you would like to that sound. You could drag it in, you could reverse it, you could stutter it or loop certain sections of it, and you could do the same thing with the dry signal. You don't have to record it into an Edison each time you want to use it. Within the pattern picker over here, you find the MIDI pattern that you want. So in this one, it's Piano 13. You'd right click and press Quick Render as Audio Clip. Then within the wave file part of the pattern picker, you can then just drag that sample in and do whatever you would like to with it. The problem with reversing it from here is that if you want the note to sound like it's reversing into itself, you would have to chop up each of the notes and drag this one to the beginning because this is actually the first note. But you then have to chop the whole thing up and it takes a long time. So the quickest way around that, duplicating that MIDI pattern, highlighting it and then pressing Alt-Y, that will allow you to flip it. Now you need to make sure that you turn preserve start times off so that it all still stays well in line. Now, if you render this audio file as an audio clip, the reversed version, you now have the exact same original sample here, except you've got the reverse, like they've flipped within their own positions. And then you can send this reverse sound back into your piano effect here, so that the reverse sound has its own reverb and delay on it. Another thing that you can then do is once you've got that sample, if you open up the sample editor here, you press Ctrl E and that will open up in an Edison. You highlight all of it and press Ctrl B and that opens up this blur tool, and you can change the amount of it so that it does it a lot or just a little. I usually keep it somewhere in the middle, and press accept. It just merges and blurs everything together. You can do exactly the same thing, but throw the original MIDI sound that you had up an octave, and that does amazing things for making it more emotional. And then I've taken that reverse sound, which is the octave below, and put that underneath it whilst the main piano is playing the octave above. Another technique that you can use here is you can take the original MIDI that you've got, and if you press Ctrl A and then Alt A, it brings up the piano arpeggiator. All of these tools can be found up here in the tools list, but there's also the shortcuts all beside them, and I just find it good to learn those because then you can test these ideas quickly. So Ctrl A to highlight, Alt A to bring up the arpeggiator. I keep the range within an octave or two. I just increase the gate so that the note length is slightly longer. And and then you've got yourself an arpeggio, and it can be pretty random. You're not going to hear this specific arpeggio very audibly once you're finished with this technique. So I did that over here with the main chord progression in the choruses. And then you print that out. Now that you've got your arpeggio, you go into your channel rack and you open up what's called Fruity Granulizer. You take that sample that you had originally there and you drag it into the Fruity Granulizer. What you're trying to do is create organized chaos. You hold down that original sample and just decrease the spacing so that it's playing several of those notes all at the same time. And then you increase the pan so that it's pushing it from side to side also. You can play around with it as much as you would like to try and get a sound that you think suits. So I think that's going to work well. Now you wash that with reverb. So I've sent that to this ambient effects channel here. And it gives more texture and character to your reverb instead of just being one or two notes held on the piano. And then the cool thing is now you can just play any notes on the scale. And you've got a ridiculously luscious reverb, all from the original piano chords. That way you've got a consistent tone that will just hold forever, rather than the reverse sound, which only lasts as long as the reverb they have lasts. So those sounds are great because they swell, but running the granulizer through effects is much better if you want some sort of infinite space that it can occupy. And you can now do that with any of the other sounds that you create. Using a guitar, you could also do it with vocals. There's all sorts of different things that you could do, and they all work really well. Another way that you can create pads and atmospheres is using a synthesizer. So for example, within Vital, I've just created this luscious pad. You want to make big, almost aggressive sounds. That's what the raw sound is like, but then if you filter those, it's much more controlled and feels very luscious. And that is being sent to this main channel here, where it's then being sent to another instrument reverb channel. Now, although it seems like I'm using lots of reverb and delay here, it's more for me about having several different instances and layers rather than just one massive reverb, because it's easier to control when you have more layers and steps to it. And obviously you can hold those notes for as long as you want. I did something very similar with Sakura, except it's a different texture, different tone. So I was using the Fluty Loops preset, but I just adjusted the reverb, the chorus, and pulled the delay down so that it wasn't quite so massive. All that I did for this Sakura one is I took the original piano MIDI that I had and literally just copied and pasted it into the Sakura. Now within this reverb channel here, I have a pretty strong EQ also, because if I remove that, it very quickly gets full and overpowering in the low end. So if you then wanted to add in bass and drums and so on, it just gets like a muddy, messy wash. That's another reason why it's really helpful separating them out into separate channels, where you've got the dry sound and the wet sound, so that you can turn the wet sound down without affecting the dry sound if you need to. I've then also added in this really luscious steel drum sound that I like. And I also then threw a Panomatic onto that one, so that it's moving a little bit more from side to side. Then another layer within Omnisphere, I found this little kalimba sound that's actually more of an arpeggiator. And I really liked that because it's got that crispy high end paired to it with that original sound, but the arpeggiator also throws the sound around. It makes it kind of dance as if there were stars twinkling within the track. That's called Tranquilimba. If you have Omnisphere and you want to go and check it out, I didn't really need to do that much to it because it sounds lovely, but of course I've just sent it to this reverb channel here. So there's a wall of ambient sounds. By doing the EQ the way that I usually do, keeping it very consistent, there's still plenty of space down in that low end because I've EQ'd most of that out so that I can then add a sub. That sub itself is relatively simple though, it's just some square waves, a little bit of white noise and some filtering alongside some relatively heavy distortion. But it doesn't do anything too complicated. I also decided to add some ambient guitar sounds with a little bit of electric and a little bit of acoustic. So there's the dry acoustic guitar, and I also found a sample of electric guitar. That sample actually came from the sample pack that comes with the piano, the Imaginary piano that I mentioned earlier, but also added lots of effects onto that guitar so that it wasn't overall too prominent. It's just another delicate bit of ear candy. The last elements that I added in were some sound effects and some real world sounds. So I've got some water sounds here. These are really tingly little sounds, and you got to be careful with the volume of them because they could very quickly overpower everything. They just sit there and appear just as a little delicate treat for your ears. Then also the classic vinyl crackle. And then with the white noises, I just took some pink noise and sent that to the same reverb with all the rest of the other instruments as well. And then these separate risers and fallers. Don't be scared to go for it with the sound effects, the white noise and so on, especially when you've got so much else going on with the rest of the instruments. Of course, the key thing that ties it all together really well is a strong kick and snare sidechain compression. As you can see here with a kick, it's sidechained to all of these different elements, and it means that you can actually make the sound effects, the other instruments, pretty big and powerful, but the kick will reel it all in and keep it controlled. It's such a feel-good vibe. I just love producing stuff like this. Oh yeah, and the last little effect that I've added in that I think I will explore a little bit more because I was just experimenting are some big ambient vocals, and all of the techniques and methods that I've used and explained in this video I just used for the vocal. So yeah, there you have it. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this track. I really enjoyed putting it together, and I hope that these techniques are helpful and useful for you and that you find this video valuable. And of course, if you do, you know what to do. I really look forward to sharing the next video with you, and you can probably click on one of those right now. But until then, believe in yourself and you will be unstoppable. Bye.